Can we talk a little bit more about this false self? Does it arise from the time that we were born, and does it sort of intensify as we go into adulthood? And what do you mean by the true self?
Yes, the false self is just a contemporary word for what Paul calls in Scripture the old self, or the old man in some translations, meaning the consciousness we have of our identity as this tissue of attitudes that have grown up around those emotional programs for happiness once they have fossilized into what might be called energy centers. So they're sources of gravity in the sense that our other faculties, imagination, memory, desires, emotions, and intentions, all circulate as a center of reference. You might call it a center of gravity that has the eye of selfishness at the center. So instead of God being the center of the universe, the false self has the egoic identification. And so everything has to serve the ego, and whatever enters into its sphere of influence then is judged not on the basis of its objectivity or its own reality, but on whether it serves the purpose of the emotional programs for happiness, which again I say are my security needs, my control issues, my desperate need for the approval of everybody. And these begin in earliest childhood as the child first separates from the mother and then develops a separate self-sense from the environment and then from its own body, and then it finally integrates all this into an adult consciousness, which is basically a false and illusion idea of who we are. And so the question of Lent and the first part of the spiritual journey is, where are you? If we respond to God and come out of the woods, that is, let go of our false self system, which is a metaphor for the trees, or a metaphor for the false self, then the next question is, who are you? And we discover more and more that we're not who we think we are. We're not the tissue of desires and commentaries and memories and plans, or an idealized self-image of what we want to attain in this life, but something much more profound, much more real, and much deeper. And this is the true self, the self that God has made, God's idea of us. But it's buried under these layers of false images, which incidentally change as the child develops through the years of early life and into adulthood. But yet, in those changes, there's not the radical letting go of the original programs for happiness, so they simply take different forms and are sometimes become more grandiose until we're confronted with the fact and are convinced that they won't work. And sometimes this takes something, nature works with God in this respect. The midlife crisis often is a moment in which a person who may be very successful in his profession realizes that he's not happy, that it's not that meaningful. And this is a period when a lot of people get divorced. The family that they planned and the relationship that they enjoyed is no more, or the children now have grown up and leave the house, and so a whole new relationship has to be forged between the couple. Sometimes they don't agree on a lot of things, and sometimes an illness will bring this about, or a bankruptcy, or a failure in profession, or a rejection by one's group. All of these things are ways that really God calls us or asks us that profound question. So you're lying in bed at the end of life, having pursued power or control or wealth or material goods or relationships romantic kind all your life. You're surrounded by doctors and psychiatrists who are trying to keep you alive or to give you some palliation for all your misery, and it suddenly dawns on you, maybe my plans for happiness were not so hot after all. What religion offers is that you don't have to live in this misery, that it's a good idea to hear the question early in life and to begin to take the path of freedom, inner freedom, and healing, and to allow the true self to be the source of one's action, which has God as the center of gravity instead of the ego.